got several bits of scripture, a big chunk of Genesis, actually. We're talking about Joseph's story. Remember Joseph in the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat? Same guy, same story, but the original version. All right, so Jacob is Joseph's father. Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. That never goes well, does it? Tattling on your brothers. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a long robe with sleeves, that multicolored Technicolor Dreamcoat. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. Okay, we're going to skip ahead here. 12. Next page. There we go. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring back word to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. He came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I'm seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock?" The man said, "They've gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers, and he found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, carrying gum, balm, and resin, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hand on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Okay, so there's the beginning of the story. We all experience times in our life when we think we've done all the right things. We've given our hearts to Christ, we've worshiped, we've been faithful to God, and then things go horribly, horribly wrong. For me, that time came after I had said yes to following God's call into ministry. Remember, I told you last week or a couple weeks ago, it took me 15 years to finally reconcile my angst and to say yes. So I'd finally come to that point where I felt confident that if this was what God was really calling me to, that God would help me. That if God brought me to it, God would help me through it. I knew going to seminary wasn't easy, but I did it. And then shortly after I gave my notice at work, I was a teacher. I told them I was leaving teaching, and I had enrolled in seminary and gotten all registered and everything. My husband Tom was downsized in a corporate merger. Gone was the substantial income that I had counted on to get us through that next 3 years. Gulp. Then in December, our son was playing at his friend's house and unwisely jumped from a top of a staircase to a marble floor, missed the pillows, and fractured his foot and had to have surgery on a compound fracture. There went that Christmas vacation. Then in May, the next May, came the diagnosis of Tom's inoperable throat cancer. That summer, while he was in treatment with chemo and radiation, an oak tree next to our house let loose of a couple large branches that came crashing down onto and then into our historic old house, sending shards of non-tempered glass like needles into the furniture and into the walls. Thank goodness there was no one in that room. Talk about a pit of despair. My heart sank once again, wondering, what on earth did we do so wrong to deserve all of this? If God was with us, if God was wanting this will for our lives to follow him into ministry, why on earth was all this bad stuff happening? Some would say that Satan was trying to tempt us to turn away from God's path, and others just called it plain bad luck. But we remained faithful to the path, and literally dozens of people helped us in 1,000 different ways. There were people that drove Tom to his cancer treatments because the radiation was twice a day, and it was a 20-minute drive back and forth. People brought us food. People helped us. We were broke, but we weren't broken. We were hurting, but healing was taking place. We were frustrated beyond belief, but we were faithful. Joseph's story has always been an inspiration to me. No matter what happened to him, he was faithful to God and used the gifts that God had given him, gifts of wisdom and discernment and an interpretation of dreams, in whatever setting he found himself. Now at first, he was a cocky teenager, 17, and his dream interpretation got him in hot water with his brothers. Jealousy convinced his brothers to conspire to kill Joseph, and they threw him into that pit rather than kill him outright. Then, when the brother who had objected to killing him in the first place returned from tending the flock, saw that the other brothers had sold him into slavery, where Joseph was taken off for Egypt, they made up a story. They got animal's blood and smeared it on that cloak and told their father that he'd been killed by a wild animal. Oh, it was horrible. We witnessed it all. Yeah, right. Not. As you can imagine, Jacob, the dad, was distraught beyond belief. He was grieving hard. Meanwhile, those slave traders, they took Joseph into Egypt and they sold him to the household of Potiphar. Now, Potiphar is the captain of the Pharaoh's guard, kind of like second in charge. In chapter 39, we're told that the Lord was with Joseph as he worked in the Potiphar's house, and Joseph became successful at just about everything he put his hand to because the Lord was with him. Now, Joseph's master noticed that everything Joseph did seemed to prosper. So that brought him favor, and he was made overseer of the whole household, and he was put in charge. Now, Joseph, he'd grown to be quite handsome, young man, and that attracted the attention of his master's wife, who tried to seduce him. Now, unlike what today's young men are encouraged by the popular culture to do, Joseph did not tap that, but instead he told her no. He would not sin against God and his master by committing adultery. One day, she entrapped Joseph. The house is quiet, everybody else is gone. She corners him and gets a hold of his garment, and he flees. I'm not sure where he fled to because the garment was in her hand. She's embarrassed, she's angry, so she plots revenge. She makes up this big story that accuses him of improper behavior, and Joseph gets thrown into the slammer. Joseph is in jail. Well, while Joseph is in jail, the chief jailer, he kind of likes him, he gains favor with him, so he puts Joseph in charge of caring for the other inmates. Okay, still in jail, but a little bit favored status. As before, everything Joseph did seemed to prosper. Now, Joseph still had his ability to interpret dreams, and when Joseph is able to accurately interpret the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer, the guy who brought him his wine and served it and made sure it wasn't poisoned, and the chief baker, they were in hot water. They'd gotten thrown into jail. And he interprets their dreams that basically says, in 3 days, you're going to get out of here, relax. And that came true. But as they're on their way out the door, he says, remember me, don't leave me here. Remember me when you get out of prison. They get out, but Joseph is never mentioned, not for a long time anyways. And poor Joseph is in jail for 2 more years, 2 years for something he had not even done. It's about then that the Pharaoh, the big guy himself, has this troublesome recurring dream that none of his wise men, his magicians, none of them can interpret it. And that's when the Pharaoh's cupbearer remembers, oh yeah, there was that guy in jail, Joseph. Yeah, Joseph. So they call for Joseph, bring him out of jail, clean him up, get shaved up, cleaned up. And he's brought before the Pharaoh. And Joseph agrees to interpret this dream, but with a caveat that it is God that will give Pharaoh the favorable answer that he seeks, not him personally. In the dream, God is telling Pharaoh that there will be 7 years of plentiful harvest, followed by 7 years of famine that will totally decimate the land, will consume everything that grows, both there in Egypt and all over the place. And in the dream, instructions are given for selecting a wise man to oversee the land of Egypt and a plan for setting aside reserves in the good times that will get Egypt through the 7 years of famine and provide for all, saving for that not rainy day, as the case may be. So Joseph obviously had the Spirit of God with him. And in wisely interpreting the dream, he gets chosen to be the overseer of all of Egypt. So here's this young man, incredibly powerful now, in an instant. 1 minute he's languishing in jail, and the next minute he's ruling over the whole country. He's told by Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh says, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no one shall lift up a hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. That's how much power Joseph is given. All this and a beautiful young wife, too. Wow. And he's only 30 years old. Can you imagine having that much power at 30 years old? Wow. So just as the dream foretold, the years of plenty happened, and the famine came to pass, and Egypt and all over the world, it says. And when the people ran out of food, Joseph was ready. They had set aside enough so that there was bread in Egypt. So people were coming from far and wide to get food because they were starving. They'd used up all their stores, including Joseph's brothers, who were sent by their father, Jacob. Now let's take a minute and imagine what could have been going through Joseph's mind. He could have harbored this anger, this deep-seated resentment for those brothers that sold him into slavery. He could have, but he didn't. he didn't. He had been betrayed, but he was able to, in his own life, stay faithful to God. And he knew that God was with him. He trusted in God's love for him. And he was faithful to observing the way of being that he knew God wanted for all of God's people, even when he was languishing in the dungeon. So the story goes on in chapters 42 to 44 with Joseph at this point unrecognized by his brothers. And he starts playing this cat and mouse game with them, kind of messing with them. He is delighted to see that his family is alive and well, especially his brother Benjamin, with whom he shares a biological mother. But he doesn't yet reveal his true identity. When Joseph conspires to keep Benjamin with him while the others go back to their father, the others respond by telling them they'd rather die than to cause further grief to their father, who had already lost a favored son. And as you can imagine, Joseph is just like, he remembers me. He missed me. It is in that moment that Joseph reveals his identity. He's overcome by emotion, and as you can imagine, his brothers are listening. They're standing stone silent. Let's read this next part. This is chapter 45. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Send everyone away from me." Because, he's got all these servants around him. So he sends all of them away, and he's in the room with his brother. So when no one stayed with him, when Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it, Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him. So dismayed were they at his presence. You can imagine, they're just freaking out. They're seeing this man with all the power of life and death over them. He could have them beheaded, I guess, if he wanted to, but he doesn't. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me." Can you imagine the scene? Okay, what are you going to do to me? And they came closer. He said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in these land these 2 years, and there are 5 more, be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You shall settle in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, as well as your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. I will provide for you there, since there are 5 more years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have will not come to poverty. And now your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see that it is my own mouth that speaks to you. You must tell my father how greatly I am honored in Egypt and all that you have seen. Hurry and bring my father down here.' Then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, while Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. And after that, his brothers talked with him." After that, they could talk with him. They knew where his heart was. He wasn't angry. He wasn't vindictive. He was at peace. He seems to have completely forgiven them because he realized that it was God at work in all of their lives. It was God that had sent him before them to preserve life. And as God had sent him away from the family, in a very unseemly method, God had used Joseph to preserve all of the people, all of God's people. God's ways are more often than not impossible for you and me to comprehend. Bad things happen to good people. And we're so eager for a resolution that we want things fixed. And we want them fixed right now. We want everything to be perfect right now. And often when those bad things happen, we start to blame God. And we think that God must not be all loving, or maybe he's not all powerful after all. Our anger and our hurt clouds our vision. But that's not how God works. God's time frame is not our time frame. God's lessons, they're often difficult and even painful, but they are meant for a greater good. All those bad things that happened during my years in seminary, the only thing to be done was to keep our heads down and keep moving forward. Prayer helped. God's emissaries helped, all our neighbors and friends and family members that helped us. Being faithful to the path helped too, and I confess we were not always perfect. We didn't always make right choices, but we made it through. We struggled in our relationship, but in the end we made it through. It took a long time. It took the counsel of mentors and counselors and lots of hard work, but we survived. And we learned a lot along the way, both about ourselves and about each other. Everyone experiences at some point in their life a dark night of the soul. Times when we feel like God has forgotten us or left us entirely. But if we can remain faithful, if we can continue to trust in God's power to bring us out of the darkness and into the light, we will see once again that, God was there the whole time. Remember, hindsight is always 100%. The minute you start to get scared about something coming, something that might happen, look back in your life and think about where God has directed and helped you and strengthened you, and he might have put you through the refiner's fire, but in the end, you came out stronger and purer. The way the refiner burns off the dross from the silver. God does that to us sometimes, but it is for a purpose, God's purpose. All along the way, we learn lessons that we then can share with others, share with our brothers and sisters in Christ, as well as our biological brothers and sisters. That can help them. News that we can share, giving witness to how God has been at work in our lives. You have a story that is unique to you. No one else has the same story. So when you tell your story, it's compelling. It is 100% true, and it's yours. Don't be afraid to share your witness of what God's been up to in your life, where God has been at work, and how grace has transformed some situation for you. Joseph bloomed everywhere he was planted, whether in jail or managing the household or running a whole country. He listened to God. He kept his head down and he prayed. We need to do the very same thing. Go where you are led. Use the gifts that God has given you. Use those gifts not just for your own benefit, but for the benefit of the church, the benefit of God's kingdom, the community of believers, the community as a whole. Don't be seduced by the world, a world that would draw us away from a way of living and into a way that's not healthy. Follow God's instructions. Love each other the way Christ has already loved you. Be melted into the heart of God. Trust God. Amen. You have lifted up some good prayers. We have a good report. Deb says that her husband, John Skinner, went to the cardiologist and got a good report. Remember, he had a very serious bypass surgery earlier this spring. Spring? How long has it been? Oh, May. That's spring. I'm going to save